For young students in Texas, identifying as a furry could be punishable by being removed from school property, suspension, or even expulsion. The Texas legislature is claiming furries are a radical movement. For anyone who isn't a furry, I'd like to give everyone a very clear definition of the group we're talking about. As someone who's been an active participant in the community for years, I feel qualified enough to explain this subculture. A furry is someone who likes the aesthetic of human-like anthro-animals. Think of old Disney movies or Looney Tune characters. Furries could express this interest by making artwork, wearing costumes, or going to conventions. Furries will make an alter ego, character, or fursona that's an animal representation of themselves. This fursona is used for self-expression, like a performer on stage. It's a unique and unconventional hobby that rewards creative people and is a very accepting and friendly community. Alongside that, the community is huge and has a population of about 1 to 3 million people and has been growing since the late 80s. But yeah, that's about it. It's just a hobby. But apparently, Texas lawmakers have a very warped perspective on what exactly furries are. The Furries Act is an acronym for the Forbidding Unlawful Representation of Role-Playing in Education. Allow me to read verbatim what exactly the law aims to ban. The Furries Act prohibits any non-human behavior by a student, including presenting himself or herself as anything other than a human being. A non-human behavior means any type of behavior or accessory displayed by a student in a school district other than behaviors or accessories typically displayed by a member of the Homo sapiens species. This includes using a litter box for the passing of stool, urine, or other human byproducts, a personal or outward display through surgical or superficial means of features that are non-human, such as tails, leashes, collars, and other pet accessories. Fur, other than naturally occurring human hair, or a wig made to look like human hair is also not permitted. Artificial, animal-like ears, or other physiological features that have not historically been assigned to the Homo sapiens species through means of natural biological development. The law also goes on to include barking, meowing, hissing, or other animal noises that are not human speech, and licking oneself or others for a purpose of grooming or maintenance. But the law does have a few exceptions for these rules. There are some exceptions to the ban on animal accessories and non-human behaviors, including dressing up for Halloween or other school dress-up events related to human history, although this would be limited to 5 days per school year, as well as theater performances and dressing up like a school mascot. I asked my fellow furry community members for their opinions about these rules. When it comes to barking in school, most of my followers do not bark at students. Many of my followers have been barked at, but typically by students who were not furries and did so in an antagonistic, mocking way. The few members that have said that they barked or make animal noises do so as a vocal stim. I recently covered how neurodivergent folks feel safer in the furry community in my last video. I'd highly suggest giving it a watch if you haven't. And most of my followers who have pretended to be an animal have done so in the context of Halloween or just for fun, where staff and students found it permissible and appropriate for the context. Since being a furry is a hobby and not a belief that they are an animal, this is a very unusual behavior for those in the fandom if it's not in a cosplaying sense, or in like a performative setting. And, of course, the most asinine rule of them all, the litter box rule. I even asked my followers if they would like schools to put litter boxes in classrooms to accommodate furries. I was given a very, very resounding no. The furries use litter box myth was pure misinformation that has been disproven for years. There have been 0 cases of it ever happening. I mean, think about it. This strange furry group has been around since the 80s and has had hundreds of yearly conventions across America. How come there have been no reports on litter boxes being used in those spaces that are specifically meant to be catered towards furries? How come this rumor is pushing the idea that furries want accommodations in public schools of all places, but not places that accommodate their group? Once you actually think about it, the entire narrative just falls apart. I will return to the reason Texas lawmakers are mentioning specifically public schools later in this video, because it is very important. This law is initially very confusing, and it is a lot more complex than it appears on the surface. I would like to first break down some important segments that will help piece together a clearer picture of why exactly these blatant lies are being pushed by these Texas lawmakers in the first place. Let's first list off the potential punishments students could face if this law is enacted. Students who fail to comply with the Furries Act could be subject to discipline. Districts must include an explanation of the provisions regarding refusal of entry or ejection from district property under Section 37.105, and prohibit any non-human behavior by a student, including presenting himself or herself on other days than exception days, as anything other than a human being. Section 37.105 is explained as follows. A school administrator, school resource officer, or school district peace officer of a school may refuse to allow another person to enter on or may eject a person from property under the district's control. This means the school is demanding staff to enforce this law onto their students via denying entry or kicking them out of school grounds entirely. But what happens if the school staff does not enforce these new strange rules? If an attorney general finds an educator, education administrator, school support staff, or contractor who operates for the school district in violation of Section 261.001A Family Code, the attorney general may levy a fine against the district no more than $10,000 for the first violation or $25,000 for any subsequent violations. If you remember, the law specifically brings up the Texas Family Code. What exactly is this and why is this relevant? The Furries Act plans to add a new line into the Family Code, pre-existing acts that fall under blank of a child. Section 5 of the Texas statute starts to describe forms of physiological, mental blank, or emotional blank, and follows them up with this: allowing or encouraging the child to develop a dependency on or a belief that non-human behaviors are socially acceptable. So, for example, if a student shows up to school with furry cosplay ears and a tail, the school staff could report them, which could possibly lead to punishment decided by the district. But let's say the teachers don't report the student and comply with the rule, the teachers could be charged for blank, simply because they are permitting non-human behaviors. So essentially, teachers not punishing children for this behavior are potentially being charged for child blank. So clearly this law is not made to solve some fictitious litter box problem. So what problem does the Furries Act claim to solve? Republican lawmakers create this narrative that there are feral animal children defecating in classrooms and licking each other. Unfortunately, furries have been used as a scapegoat to create hysteria, specifically about public schools. Their outrage on this furry boogeyman is a misdirect that is aimed to specifically instigate pearl-clutching reactions to unknowing Texas parents. So imagine you're a parent. You watch the news and all these scary, bizarre stories are coming out about how public schools are allowing this kind of behavior and producing delinquent children. And let's also say, for example, your governor, Greg Abbott, says this: "No parent should have to endure such treatment." And this is another example of why I always have long championed school's choice in Texas. The word choice seems to suggest that as a parent, you might have the option to rescue your kid from these unruly classrooms where children are permitted to scamper around in furry costumes and be barked at by these animalistic freaks. But this school choice is much deeper and has much more implications than just picking a different school. School's choice is essentially giving parents the choice to put their tax dollars into privatized schools instead of funding the public ones in their neighborhoods. This is supposed to give parents the opportunity to give their kids more options, which is great for the families that can afford this choice. This concept also implies that educational institutions should compete with one another for students. The competition is supposed to improve the quality of the school. So for parents who can afford higher education and privatized schooling, it sounds like a really good idea. But this action will cause very negative effects on those who rely on public schools and will potentially dismantle the already underfunded schools. Many low-income communities could be affected as they may not be able to afford better schooling. These better schools cannot take in every student, so it becomes a lottery system, leaving many families forced to enroll in severely underfunded public schools. According to the ABC, these programs, which are also referred to as school vouchers and school freedom, allows parents to take tax dollars allocated for their children to attend public schools, and in most cases, use that money to send them to private schools. This is something that Texas lawmakers are trying to set in place, which also happens to align with the President administration's Project 2025 goal, defund and dismantle the Department of Education. To briefly summarize the point I'm trying to make, Texas lawmakers are attempting to use the Furries Act to cause fear and distrust in the public school system. This narrative causes parents to distrust public schools where this behavior is allegedly permitted. Schools' choice programs and vouchers pull students from public school systems, causing the said schools to perform even worse. In doing this, it allows funding and education to be cut without uproar, making those who cannot access privatized education even more disadvantaged. While there are current flaws in our current school systems, giving public schools more funding could help solve a lot of the problems we're facing. Inadequate teachers could be helped by higher wages and more steep job requirements. The NEA suggests more funding for public schools leads to better student outcomes. More funding gives schools access to more supplies, new buildings, more staff for operations, more opportunity for field trips and extracurriculars. Research shows that students with higher budgets produce higher test scores, narrower achievement gaps for poor and wealthy students, and higher graduation rates. Unfortunately, this law is much more than just trying to crack down on furry culture and the furry fandom. Because as we've already covered, most of these bizarre stories of rabid children wearing fursuits and peeing in letterboxes in class is not happening. So why would lawmakers go out of their way to push this law? They are using this Furries Act to cause hysteria and misinformation on public schooling. Texas parents who vote yes on these laws inadvertently affect their own students' education along with members in the same community. Republican Texas lawmakers have a goal to defund public education. Quality education and fair access to educational resources is the most important aspect to having a functioning democracy and country, which I think both sides should agree on. To my fellow U.S. citizens and residents of Texas, we should try our best to educate ourselves and each other, along with being brave enough to call out misinformation and lies made to distill fear. Democracy depends on people's right to free speech. We should feel compelled to speak out if our state officials are ignoring real issues and peddling false narratives. Without access to truth and facts, we are no longer free as a country. But yes, that's the end of the video. I hope this better explains what exactly is happening with this strange new law. If I got any information potentially wrong in this video, don't be afraid to let me know. Also, if you'd like to support my work, I sell really cute sun and moon hoodies, tank tops, and t-shirts on my Etsy, if anyone would be interested. I appreciate all the support on my last few videos. I'd like to thank everyone so much for watching them. Every time I read one of the comments, they're really sweet, and I really appreciate that it reached so many people. But yeah, let me know what you'd like me to cover next. Bye.